Hello, I'm Mark Pizzato, and I'm presenting to you an inner theater model of consciousness. I started developing my inner theater model about 2 decades ago with this book in 2006, which starts by considering the debate between philosophers Daniel Dennett and Slavoj Žižek regarding the Cartesian cogito, I think, therefore I am. Then I explored inner theater issues regarding God, angel, and devil characters in my 2011 book, looking at theater history, films from the 20th century, and a TV series from the 1990s called Millennium. And I focused on beast people, that is vampire, werewolf, and ape planet movies, also lab-created hybrids in films through this book in 2016. And I have another book forthcoming in 2024 about European churches and Chinese temples, further developing my neurotheatrical theory. I agree with philosopher Nidesh Latu that we have a phantom ego involving a mimetic unconscious. Our experience of subjective self is thus illusory and yet whole, and it involves our early childhood experience with mimicking facial expressions just an hour after birth and attending to others' goals and following gazes, but continuing throughout life, rewiring our brains. This relates also to philosopher and psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan's theory of the mere stage of the baby 6 to 18 months. We're very helpless at birth and start to develop a sense of self or ego through how others react to us, mirror us, like the child finding itself in the mirror. But this continues throughout life with the dimensions Lacan calls the real, our fragments of instinctual being, the imaginary, as we glimpse a sense of self in the mirror and others' views, yet that involves an alienating misrecognition as well, and the social networks of rules and language, which Lacan calls the symbolic. Shifting to global workspace theory from cognitive psychologist Bernard Bars, he's been very helpful to me in using theater metaphors, the stage of working memory, limited spotlight of attention, and unconscious scene setters. Also, conceptual deep goal and outer contextual frames with memory traces as an audience, shaping conscious scenes. This is illustrated in Bars's book of 1997, but he's reiterated these terms and extended them in his recent summary of his career, a book called On Consciousness. But you can see here, back in 1997, he was also using theater terms and diagrams. So how does this involve social interactions between brains with ego and group identifications, yet mimetic, potentially violent rivalries? And how does it also involve subconscious, subcognitive consciousness, regarding the theme of this conference, in brain-body connections and between brain bodies? This is my model of a inner theater mapping using social neuroscience, especially the work of Matthew Lieberman. And there are many networks that I use theater metaphors for, but focusing today on the main ones here in bold. Scriptwriter critic in the left hemisphere, mime improviser in the right, audience with temporal lobes and insula, and stagehands with subcortical or limbic areas. And also an evolutionary heritage from our fish, reptilian, vertebrate ancestors through mammalian to primate, and then distinctively human networks as well. Ian McGilchrist's meta-analysis of left and right hemisphere research has been very helpful to my model regarding sharply focused attention to detail with the left hemisphere and sustained broad open vigil and alertness with the right. This is my mapping of Ian McGilchrist's book from 2009, his meta-analysis of left and right hemisphere functions, which you can see I relate to the Lacanian symbolic and imaginary real, also involving the feminist issues of the patriarchal or mother-child relations. Notice especially the evolutionary heritage of predator functions in our left hemisphere with focused, objectifying, tool-using abilities in humans, and prey or mating heritage with our right hemisphere, broad awareness, and being life, death, sex-oriented. I've highlighted here in color the competitiveness of left hemisphere, the cooperative functions of right, the abstract analytical thinking, inhibiting right cortical and subcortical ties, limbic system as well, with emotional sensory intuition in the right hemisphere. Examining parts in a linear categorical way in the left, comprehending the whole in a more cyclical contextual way with the right. So that involves especially the objectifying dimension versus a broader holistic. And this also involves a mapping I do of survival, reproduction, territoriality, mammalian care, alliance hierarchy, playfulness, and so on, animal drives that become more distinctively human up here and become experienced as and expressed as primary emotions, and then through human cultural extensions as social emotions, also with my latest work, religious ideals. Notice the color coding again, the more left hemisphere, alliance hierarchy and territoriality, especially with competitive drives. Our brain's ordering of consciousness is affected by repeated viewings of melodrama from stage to screen, and that involves good versus evil, objectifying of villains in saving or avenging victims. And that melodramatic mode has an alternative, however, more tragicomic mode with complex characters and changing perspectives, affecting the viewer with an alternating immersion yet distance, according to ancient Indian rasa theory of tasting emotions. I connect that with Aristotle's theory of tragic catharsis, where he specifies plot twists and recognition scenes as also changing the viewer's perspective, in contrast to the more complete identification with heroes, fear, courage, and rage, and then victory over evil. So I theorize that melodramatic mode involves more left cortical activity dominating the subcortical trickster, and the tragicomic mode more balance between the scriptwriter critic and right hemisphere mime designer regarding the subcortical trickster. So the problem ethically is how this mode, melodrama, emphasizes objectified stereotypes and scapegoats of hero, villain, and victim, scapegoating the villain in righteous, vengeful violence. But the alternative tragicomic mode helps us to develop more fluid, holistic mindfulness, ordering our cognitive consciousness and perhaps our subcognitive consciousness regarding this conference and our microtubular neurons, especially with bottom-up supportive trickster stagehand signals in the brain body and between our bodies through the functioning of mirror neurons and emotional contagion. Thank you for attending to this presentation.